The UN seeks to extend a shaky ceasefire after 17 months of conflict in Yemen. Is the time right for a new round of peace efforts? And how will this conflict impact the region? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. Well, the parties to the Yemen conflict rarely see eye to eye on anything. And the ceasefire, it seems, no exception. Both sides blaming each other for violating a truce which began on Wednesday. The UN wants to extend that for another 72 hours, but the violence is continuing. And Saudi-led coalition forces say Houthi rebels fired rockets that hit a school in Zeidan, that's along the Saudi border. The rebels accuse their rivals of launching airstrikes in Yemen's Sanaa province, which is also on the border. The ceasefire was supposed to allow in aid to ease the dire humanitarian crisis. It was also a way to find a diplomatic solution to the conflict. Well, this is not the first attempt to find a pathway to peace in Yemen, of course. You'll recall in April, the Houthis and forces loyal to President Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi began a fragile ceasefire, but there were violations from both sides almost immediately. At the same time, UN-brokered peace talks began in Kuwait, but they fell apart when the Houthis announced a new ruling council of Yemen. In a show of support for the decision, huge rallies were organised in the capital Sanaa. The Yemeni government delegation left Kuwait in protest. And as the conflict continues, it's the people who suffer the most. Earlier this month, the Saudi-led coalition launched an airstrike on a funeral which killed 140 people. The coalition said the attack was based on what it called bad information. Yemen's Vice President Ali Hussain Al has indicated there's a renewed desire for peace. He said on Twitter on Friday, the Yemeni government is serious about restoring peace and resuming the political process. The government is convinced of the necessity to end the war and find a real solution that would serve the Yemeni people. Let's bring our guests into the show then. We have joining us from Sanaa, Hussain Al Bukhaiti, a Houthi supporter. In Riyadh, Ahmed Alibrahim, Saudi affairs specialist. And here in the studio in Doha, we have Sultan Barakat, a specialist in war and conflict. Welcome to you all. If I could start with Hussain in Sanaa. The Vice President of Yemen is talking about renewing peace talks. From the Houthi perspective, is the time right to resume the peace effort?
I think it's for all sides in Sanaa. They are willing to talks, and they have showed in the last 18 months that they have accepted the 2216, the Gulf Initiative. They went to Kuwait, if Kuwait was part of this aggression or war on Yemen, and at the end they were kind of held hostage in Muscat. They didn't allow them to come back into Sanaa. They left Sanaa with the UN convoy. So this shows you that the one who doesn't want peace is the other side, who have started the war, the other side who have
but my question is, from the Houthi perspective, is that a no then, from the Houthi perspective, that you don't see any point in trying to resume peace talks right now?
I cannot tell you what's the Houthi official point, but I can tell you mine, that we in Yemen, we don't see that anything will come from peace talk, because by every day there are more kind of blockade in Yemen. Yemeni airport used to be, we used to have a daily flight outside Yemen, but straight away after they went to Kuwait for talks, they were banned from coming back, and the airport was bombed, and they blocked the airport. So we've seen that the more you talk with the Saudi, the more you talk with the UN, there are kind of more sanctions on Yemen. So me, myself, I don't believe there is any peace to talk, peace coming from these talks, because Yemeni people are suffering every day more and more.
All right, let's take the question then to Riyadh. Ahmed, what's the perspective as you read it from Riyadh? Do you think that there is any optimism there that this ceasefire can be extended into something more of a deeper, meaningful diplomatic peace process?
Sami, trust me, Saudi Arabia is trying so hard for this to work, but the Houthis and Ali Abdullah Saleh is trying to make it fail by force. You know, you're talking about the 6 humanitarian ceasefires happening in Yemen. Yesterday at 10 a.m. till 10 p.m. we had 43 attacks on the Saudi border from the Houthis, and let alone that we have over 300 within the borders within Yemen has been violating all the ceasefire rules that they've been put together. So if you're talking about Saudi Arabia
let me jump in here, gentlemen, because I'm going to try and focus us, get a little bit analytical on the prospects of peace talks. I know that both sides are not happy with the other one, but does that mean, Ahmed, that really, from the Saudi perspective or the perspective in Riyadh, there is little hope of the resumption of peace talks?
We are fully in hope that for this to happen, but it's failing, honestly. If this is going to continue, I think Saudi Arabia is going to take it all out and all over, because, listen, they've tried to do everything possible to hold peace talks, to get it done politically, to have a political solution. Saudi Arabia has given in so much in order for this to work. I mean, look at some of the borders, which is Wadi Gharib and Wadi Arish. For the past 18 months, they've been closed, even with 6 ceasefires. It's never been open. This militia, it's a militia. They don't have any attention to work with peace. They would live, they would multiply when it's an environment of war. So Saudi Arabia, yes, indeed, they are hoping, even though there is no hope, but they're hoping for this to work. They're trying to knock on each and every door, but it's failing. And the coalition and all, it's documented and it's been sent to the United Nations
let's take that
and
point
to the allies of the United
and
States of
continue
America
it here in the studio. Okay, the process failing, a negative, I would say, sort of assessment from both Sanaa and Riyadh, from our guests in Sanaa and Riyadh. Begs the question, are the dynamics any different right now?
Well, they are actually, and I think...
what is different?
What's different is that they now engaged in talks, as opposed to the previous stages where they refused to talk or they were imposing conditions that were impossible to meet on each side.
But it doesn't sound like the result of that engagement has ended in anything positive, does it?
There is no alternative, really. Both parties need to work harder to make sure that those talks succeed. And one way of doing so is to put down ground rules on that engagement. One of it is all delegations going for negotiations have got to be protected, and their travel, their communication back to their communities have got to be facilitated. Otherwise, they will no longer represent their communities back home. So that's the basic of any mediation process. The second, I think, is that they have to accept that there will be a degree of violation of ceasefire. And I think Saudi Arabia would be mistaken to try and match its action to that of the Houthis, that are basically militias on the ground. They have very different communication channels, hierarchies, ability to pass on the ceasefire orders from one side to the other. So you can't really hold them responsible for every single violation. And if you do... Okay,
Sultan, I was interested that you said that you felt that the dynamics have changed slightly. Why? Is that linked to last week's bombing of a funeral? Has that kind of shifted the scene?
Well, the engagement in itself starts with compromises. So it changes the dynamic and the posture of each party towards the conflict. Now, the mistakes that have been made by Saudi coalition in the last couple of weeks are very, very important. And I think from the early days of the bombing, you know, they took out all the main targets in Yemen. And the longer this war goes, the greater the possibility of making mistakes, because the quality of the intelligence coming in from the ground is very poor. And has been for a long time, and is only likely to get worse with time.
All right, let's take that point back to Riyadh. Ahmed, does Saudi Arabia see that its military campaign has perhaps achieved what it could already have achieved at this point, but it hasn't succeeded in pushing the Houthis out of Sanaa, out of other areas, and there's probably little to be achieved going forward?
I think the target has been achieved since they actually renamed it from the decisive storm to restoring hope. I think, yes, indeed, it has been achieving. Now, what we're trying is, or Saudi Arabia, what they are trying is to contain what's left of Yemen. Listen, if we would like 2 states in Yemen, we could have left it alone. If we would like Yemen to be another state of Saudi Arabia, I'm sure the Saudi leadership, they have a plan of 5 days to do that. But every day, I know that the Saudi-led coalition, they meet over a round table and they discuss civilians target and not to target it. But the militias of the Houthis, they are very devils when it comes to these things, by restoring kids, women, children inside mosques, schools, and they put a big, tankers or whatever kind of weapons. I'm not familiar with the name, but so they create it as a target, so they get a lot of sympathy. The funeral thing, it was an intelligence brief,
forgive
but
me
I'm
for
not going to talk
interrupting,
about
but
that.
there have been criticisms, of course, by Amnesty International, by Human Rights Watch about the coalition strikes in
Sami,
September 22nd. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty also saying that they documented 70 unlawful coalition airstrikes. Some of them may amount to war crimes.
Sami, these kind of things, nobody likes to start a war. Nobody like any civilian to get hit. All of us, we feel sorry for any, not let alone civilians. If an animal gets hit on the street, we feel sorry for them. The United States actually built bunkers in Iraq, and the amnesty wasn't on the ground, and they did not yap like this. So if these, with respected, organization, they are not on the ground in Yemen, and they give twisted information, I'm not going to discuss that, but it needs to be more accurate. They need to come and sit with the coalition, the Saudi-led coalition, on the table every morning to discuss what targets they are talking about. Saudi Arabia-led coalition is not responsible for these kind of Houthis,
but Amnesty and Human Rights Watch
in these military
seem to think
taverns.
so. You're saying they're wrong. They're talking even about, quote, deliberately targeting civilian objects, Ahmed.
That is insane. This is wrong. Nobody in this world. Saudi Arabia is part of the 20 countries. They are a full-fledged country. They are not militia. The Yemeni people are like us. They are very close to us. We have over 3 million Yemenis live in Saudi Arabia. Our habits are the same of our habits. So we will not. Saudi Arabia not in the DA or not in the business of killing any human. So they need to go back and review their sources on the ground.
To come in, but before we do that, perhaps it's a good point to remind ourselves of who exactly controls what in Yemen. Now, the Houthi rebels hold several provinces, including their stronghold, the capital Sanaa. They're backed by forces loyal to former President Ali Abdullah Saleh. They have the support of Iran. Troops loyal to Yemen's President Abdurrabba Mansour Hadi have set up a temporary capital in the southern port city of Aden. Hadi's forces are mostly in the east of Yemen. He has the backing of Sunni tribes and a coalition of 9 Arab states, including Saudi Arabia. But there are other groups in the mix. These shaded areas show where Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula has influence. It's anti-Houthi, but not aligned in any way with the government. So a very confusing situation. Hussain, I guess my question is, do the Houthis accept that they do not represent all of Yemen and they cannot therefore rule all of Yemen by force?
Of course they do accept that. And from the first day they have entered Sanaa, they have asked all parties to join an agreement and to join a partnership, a government of partnership.
But why didn't they then implement UN Security Council resolution, if you don't mind me jumping in here, 2216, which called, particularly it mentioned the Houthis to withdraw from Sanaa, give up arms they've seized, and cease actions which are exclusively within the authority of the legitimate government of Yemen?
Look, if you look into the withdrawal of Sanaa, you have to look into other area in Yemen where Houthi has withdrawn. What has happened there? In Aden, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and other militia group, people are dying in the south, and those areas are not secured. So I don't think that anybody wants the Houthi to withdraw from Sanaa and from this area, because this is what the Saudi want. This is what the United States want.
The response to that is going to be that it is the responsibility of the internationally recognized government to confront the problem, whether it's Al-Qaeda or ISIS. It is not the responsibility of an armed militia that takes over the country by force. That logic only feeds into instability, the argument goes.
Okay, now if the Houthi did not have the support, and if Ali Abdullah Saleh didn't have the support, they will not be standing there for 18 months while 10 of the richest countries in the world, including France and Britain and the United States, are giving a full support and selling weapons to this. So, and the Houthis still, and the Yemeni army still standing. On the top of that, they have entered Saudi territory. They have entered south of Jizan and Najran and Asir, and they are using basic tool. They just use lighters to burn Saudi tanks that they have they buy for billions of dollars. So to see
but doesn't that come to my first question? That's precisely my point, Hussain. You know, my first point was, do you recognize that the Houthis do not represent all of Yemen? The argument that they have support, well, undoubtedly they have some support, but they're fighting fellow Yemenis as well as the Arab coalition,
they do not. If you let me, they do not represent all Yemenis. They never say they represent all Yemenis. As well, Hadi and the Muslim Brotherhood, and as we call them Islah in Saudi Arabia, they do represent all Yemenis. And if you just give me more minutes, because you give the other guest more, about your guest in Saudi Arabia saying that they are trying very hard, like to avoid and killing civilians. All international community and NGOs are saying that the Saudi are deliberately targeting Yemen civilians. The Saudi have denied MSF hospital attacks. They have targeted 4 times in Saada and in Ta'iz and in Hajjah and other area. As well, they denied the attack of the funeral, and then they recognized it. So this shows you that
right, but
this
at the
war
same
is
time,
built
look,
on a lie.
Hussain, I've given you time, but I'm
threat.
going to also, if you allow me, and forgive me, to interrupt you as I did for our guest in Saudi Arabia. Is it not also true that those same human rights organizations you are quoting have condemned the Houthis? Let me give you an example. The World Report 2016 of Human Rights Watch says, quote, Houthi forces also committed serious laws of war violations, indiscriminate artillery rockets in southern cities, deploying child soldiers, unlawfully detaining aid workers.
Who is blocking an investigation by the international community?
Well, they're not complaining of that. They're complaining about how the Houthis are operating.
The Human Rights Panel in Geneva for this investigation. So to say that they have condemned the Houthi, we know that they have condemned the Houthis. But why you are blocking the international community, the Saudi, the British, and the American? Why are they blocking an international investigation into all violation in Yemen? Why they are not allowing an investigation team to come into Yemen? Why the Saudi are blocking any investigation team into Yemen?
Actually,
the Saudi
that is
said
not
they
true,
will
because Saudi Arabia announced that
you know
they want to.
Okay, let's take this one at a time.
Hussain,
go ahead, Ahmed. Go ahead briefly. I'll give you 30 seconds, Ahmed, just to come back on this. Then I want to shift the conversation.
Very quickly, very recent, very fresh to the memory. Saudi Arabia, actually the first country asked to do an investigation in the funeral that happened in Sanaa. And Saudi Arabia is, sitting with the all Western countries, and they are discussing all civilian targets. But you are, guys, so good in putting women and children in military base and asking, oh, this is a civilian base. This
I'm going to jump
true.
in here and try and move the conversation. And I guess that's a good demonstration of how the dynamics in this conflict are locked into a confrontational mode. Now, while we're hearing signals from Saudi Arabia and the Yemeni government that they're in favor of some sort of resumption of the peace effort, do you see that same appetite on the other side?
Well,
what's the incentive right now for the Houthis? They control the land,
yes,
or a lot of the land, not all of it.
Well, you kind of
touched a lot of the guns. What's the incentive for them?
You touched on some of that, is that they do understand that they're not representative of the whole of Yemen. And they do understand that there is no way in which they can govern the country for too long. In fact, the actual civic governance is very, very difficult for them at the moment. You know, although they have done rather well in terms of keeping institutions together, they themselves started to commit mistakes in terms of appointing their own people into positions. And the more they go on governing the way they're governing at the moment, without experience, without knowledge of the delicate balance in various parts of the country, it's inevitable that people will turn against them. So I think they have reached a stage also where it would be very wise for them to rethink their position and to consider talks much more seriously.
We should also not forget, perhaps, Sultan, that while this is a conflict in Yemen, it definitely is a regional conflict, or a conflict that involves or touches upon the interests of many countries in the region, right? Do you see a shift in the regional appetite?
Well, I mean, it started with a very strong sort of polarization between Saudi Arabia and Iran. But in fact, it has 18 months now have shown that Iran effectively had very little support directed towards the Houthi, tangible support in Yemen. And I think now would be a good time again for Saudi Arabia to reconsider that position and to see to what extent...
So you disagree with those US generals like Joseph Votel, who has said recently that, and he is of course the commander of the US Central Command, quoted 21st of October 2016, that I do think, he says, Iran is playing a role in some of this, and he was referring to the latest attacks or attempts to attack shipping in Bab el-Mandeb in the Red Sea. You don't see any degree, that, given the type of missiles that they're using, which is similar to reverse-engineered Iranian anti-shipping missiles, you don't see a degree of Iranian, if not involvement, but perhaps at least acquiescence or agreement?
Well, there may have been recently some attempts to try and enter this discussion, this position in greater force. But I think for 18 months, we had the opportunity of them only using rhetoric. The Iranians are they've been very clever in terms of dragging the Saudi Arabia further into this war by using slogans really about their support to the Houthis in Yemen. And I think given the circumstances, both sides should really reconsider their position based on today's realities and today's challenges.
All right, let's get the view from Sanaa. Hussain, do you see perhaps an emboldening of the Iranian appetite to expand the conflict in Yemen?
This is just a big fat lie, because we know that the Saudis started this war because they said the Houthi are getting support and weapons from Iran, and they want to stop that because this is a threat to their border. So after 18 months of war, after 18 months of destruction, 18 months of tight blockade, they still say and try to blame the Iranian for their failure. They have failed in all the targets. They have failed in everything. The only thing they have succeeded is in killing Yemeni civilians. And just I want to mention one more thing, if you let me. To ask the Saudi to investigate themselves is like asking Hitler to investigate the Holocaust. It just cannot be right. And I know that there are crimes committed by both parties, as Human Rights Watch have said, but who's blocking those investigation? Who have blocked the Human Rights Panel in Geneva twice from conducting an international investigation into Yemen? Who have forced the Ban Ki-moon and the UN to remove the Saudi
twice,
from
Hussain.
the blacklist for children?
Hussain, I've got about a minute left for you. Could I get you to comment on how you read the Iranian appetite for conflict in Yemen?
I've said there is no Iranian appetite or influence in Yemen. This is just an excuse.
You don't see any Iranian supplies of weapons, any backing?
Iran sent weapons to the Houthi. 18 months of blockade. They're not allowing food to come in. How can they bring weapons into Yemen? I mean, we have to think. We are human beings. I mean, what's the point of the 18 months of the blockade? 18 months of bombing bridges, and at the end of this war, they're going to say the same excuse they started the war, that Iran is supporting Yemen.
All right, I've given you a minute and a half, Hussain, so forgive me. We've got about a minute and a half left. I want to give it now to Ahmed in Riyadh. Go ahead, sir.
I mean, I really don't know what the gentleman in Sanaa is having in his tea, but let's move on. Iran is deeply involved with the Houthis. I mean, you know, the USS Mason was struck by a rocket. We have a couple incidents. Last one, it was a week and a half ago, that a missile called Zilzal 3, it's by Yemen. So I kind of think that Iran is really involved with the Houthis. The Houthis only represent Tehran and Qom and the militia, the government over there. I think what needs to be done is to take this cancer out, which is called Houthi, and bring all the the sides of Yemen to agree on and push forward government in Yemen. And let alone, as your guest in the studio said, we're going to anticipate some violation of the ceasefire, that the Saudis needs to be regaining control.
But Ahmed, isn't that exactly what's been tried now for the last how many months, and that hasn't worked? And perhaps my question is it time to look at the
Sami,
regional engagement, a wider regional engagement to end this conflict?
Because Iran is engaged in Yemen, Iran is engaged in Iraq, Iran is engaged in Syria. Iran has a forward brigade called Hezbollah, and now they have the same replica of the Iranian flag in Yemen called Ansarullah. So you see the branding and the logos of Iran is coming all over. You can see them everywhere.
I'm afraid we are running.
So what I'm saying is Saudi Arabia is trying its best to do a political solution.
On that point,
but if the Houthis cannot,
we're going to have to end it there. Thanks so much, gentlemen. I'm sure we'll be back here before not too long to continue to discuss the situation in Yemen. But for now, let's thank our guests, Hussain Al Bukhaiti, Ahmed Alibrahim, and here in the studio, Sultan Barakat. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zeidan, and the whole team here for now is goodbye.